Now, this course has been going on for 2 years, but you can slip in at any place, I guess. Pass them on.
Thank you.
All right, we're starting out with the F1 female chart. And this is a assignment for next time, which is virtually the same as this, except that we use the other two charts.
Oh, the other two charts that you gave us?
That's for next week.
Oh.
Yeah, you've got them all there. Oh. What this is that we started out giving keywords and fill in the blank keywords and things like that. And then we wrote a lot of different kinds of sentences to get all kinds of variety in. And now what we're doing is we're going piece by piece through the physical personality, the emotionality, the mentality, and the spirituality and individuality together. And we're doing sentences, as many as you want to do for each of them. And the assignments tell you what we're working with. And we're working with the F1 female chart, which is the horoscope of Anais Nin, who Lulu loves dearly, and I may have derogatory things to say about. That's because she's thoroughly positive and I'm thoroughly negative. So, all right. The first sentence that I have here is the basic emotionality of this woman can be cold and objective, but in a way which is striking, so conventional that it is unconventional. What we're looking at here, the basic emotionality is shorthand, but not jargon, for the moon. And the moon in this horoscope is in Capricorn. And so with the moon in Capricorn, what we're looking at is a cold and objective kind of emotionality. But because it is conjoined to Uranus, it gets quirky. So this is one of those people that can sometimes be so conventional or so orthodox that they become unorthodox. Some people can open up a matchbook in the only way it can be opened up and be unorthodox about it, and that's the kind of thing we're trying to talk about. Okay. Anybody else have a sentence? You didn't bring...
I didn't think we would pick up right where we left off. You know?
Oh, how
like
could you? Oh,
we would be like sharing.
I think that's a grandiose excuse for writer's block or something like that. When I gave the assignment out last time, I said you have all summer long to
Fail to do it.
to come up with good sentences.
So we doubly embarrassed when it
That's right.
And how about the other student who offers sentences? Now it's my turn to laugh.
Remiss.
Remiss. Miss Remiss, all right.
Remiss.
My goodness, we're going to be here an amazingly short time if we're just going over my sentences. Her basic emotionality, beside being cooled and controlled from a writer's discipline, is copious and almost overdone in its expression. What we're talking about here, we're still with the basic emotionality, meaning the moon, and the being cool from the writer's discipline. The writing and communications is from the third house. And the is copious and almost overdone. We're talking about the sextiles of the moon to Jupiter and the sun. They're both in a watery Jupiterian sign, and Jupiter being there means very great fluency and copiousness. She wrote how many volumes of diaries?
Well, published there's I think 3, but she She had diaries from the time she was 11 years old.
Oh, yes.
So there's a photo of her with her diaries, and there are mountains of diaries.
Yes, and there are several versions of them, right?
Yeah.
She did like Jay Gould with the books. He kept 2 sets, one for, one for the IRS and one for reality. Yeah, she's known for not being completely true. You know, with a creative mind like this, a person is going to get creative even with journaling. And the creative notion of her life is much more exciting than the uncreative one. All right.
Life was pretty exciting though.
Oh my goodness, I didn't check these all for errors. While being emotionally disciplined for communication, she is at the same time generous and expansive in her emotional expression. When we're talking about expression, we're talking about the 5th house. The 3rd house is communication, the 5th house is expression. Communication has to do with things being proper and correct. Expression has to do with pouring something into it. Some people, if you read their letters, they are technically imperfect, but the feelings are so strong that they express the person clearly without the technique. So what we're talking about here, the generosity is obviously the whole Jupiterian quality to it. The expansiveness is the whole Jupiterian quality. And since it involves the moon and watery signs, we're looking at emotional expression. You try to always include things that have redundancies to them. All right, number 4, her emotions feed her self-image and enlarge it so that even though she might consider herself as a writer to be intellectual, it is with her emotionality that she leads. All right, you are the Anais expert. Is that true? Does she put a lot of emotionality into her writing?
Yeah. She was very emotional, and she was very good about writing about her emotional states, though.
Okay, yeah. So what we're talking about, it is the emotional expression is again the 5th house. These are really, really simple things. So she may consider herself to be an intellectual, but it is with her emotionality that she leads, because that's where she puts herself into. The sun is the self. All right, we're getting to a little bit better sentences here. Still fairly simple. All of these are meant to be very simple. The strongest and most pronounced tendency in her basic emotionality is to enlarge on her feelings and to expand on them for reflection and synthesis. And this capacity is facilitated by almost paradoxically the opposite tendency to concentrate and focus her emotions. It is as though the maternal and paternal principle are fused in the basic emotionality. It should be the maternal and paternal principles, but that's what we get from not having an editor. Julie will have to come and sit on my lap and edit for me so that I get the grammar right.
I'm so detail-oriented.
All right. The strongest and most pronounced tendency in the emotionality is the enlargement. We're talking about, we're being redundant here, but we're talking about the expansive thing again. And expanding on her feelings, and the basic feelings are the moon. And the reflection and synthesis, those are straight as keywords, but they work perfectly with the English language, and so we don't want to use an astrological patois. They are straight out of the keywords for the sextile, if you have those keywords yet. And the concentration and focus brings back to Saturn. We're looking at the whole pattern now. We're looking at the moon Uranus and the sextile to the Jupiter Sun. And so that there is that concentration and then focus. The maternal principle is the moon, and the paternal principle is the sun. And they are fused together in the basic emotionality so that her emotionality is both masculine and feminine. All right. Any questions on that? Yes.
Question, would you consider Uranus sextiling the sun?
No, but its influence comes in by association. And that's called revolving. That's called a revolving aspect. When it aspects a planet that aspects another, there is some secondary influence that carries across. It is a tendency, especially with detailed people like Virgos, to be very discreet, which is good. You recognize that the influence of Sun and Uranus is not very strong, but there's a tendency to partition things according to the aspects. And we're doing that for the very simple sentences to begin with, but eventually we try to get more and more everything together as a whole. And if you want, you can be corrective and say that the intuitive part in terms of self-recognition is less than the reflective part in her emotionality. You could make a sentence like that. In fact, you can even give us a spontaneous sentence right now if you'd like to.
That's for the revolving aspect?
A revolving, when one thing aspects another, which aspects another, aspects another. That's a term that is used mostly with conjunctions. When you have a large number of planets all in one sign or all in one house, and the first one certainly doesn't aspect the last one, but the first one aspects the second, and then the second the third, and so on down the line.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right.
So most of the
She tries to universalize and abstract emotions, and it is in that generalized state that they are given out with brightness and greatness and with considerable self-understanding. The first part of this sentence is relating strictly to the Jupiter part, because that is the universalization and that is the abstraction, especially in the sextile. And so she's generalizing them. And they're given out with brightness and greatness, and those are both Jupiterian keywords. And then, as an afterthought, considerable self-understanding is where the sextile to the sun comes in. Because the orb of these Jupiter and the moon is a much smaller orb, and so the influence is much stronger. And so that you give the strongest amount of emphasis to, and the solar, though it's not really weak, is secondary. If this was all there was to her basic emotionality, it would be fine. But it isn't all there is, and the introduction of spiritual or psychological or psychically foreign elements into her emotionality introduce considerable confusion and misunderstanding, almost to the degree of superstition. Now we're bringing in the Neptune opposite to the moon. So when we bring that in, we're bringing in psychological factors or psychic factors. Psychological factors, if you become a Freudian, she was very much of a Freudian, you start out-Freudianizing yourself, and you're analyzing yourself to pieces, and it leads to confusion. And in her case, if you accept something as a belief system, the moon opposite Neptune, and that's a pretty strong aspect. The moon opposite Neptune is almost always a matter of superstition. So we're saying that the confusion is such that she's almost emotionally superstitious. I have the moon opposite Neptune, and I have to be very careful of being superstitious about things. Superstition usually is a substitution. It's where you substitute something for something else. Like scientists think that it is a superstition to put a feeling where there should be a fact. Well, it's just as much of a superstition to put a thought where there should be a feeling. You know what I mean? There's a lot of scientific types that are superstitious in that they refuse to regard feelings as being real or important or anything of that nature. You look so serious, Jer.
I'm just
Just listening.
Okay. All right. Number 8, the ability to abridge emotions or contain them so that they can be used practically and communicated with exactness is a fine talent. But there are some feelings and emotions, usually the transcendent ones, I'm missing all kinds of commas in all these sentences, as it is in this case, which cannot be communicated, and trying to pigeonhole them puts one a sea rather quickly. Yes, we get a little bit philosophical here, a little bit psychological as we go on. The abridging the emotions is obviously the moon in Capricorn, and she does that to be able to communicate them and to use them practically, which is obviously the 3rd house. And it is a fine talent. But there are some emotions, usually transcendent ones, and now we're bringing in the Uranus and Neptune, that when they come in, they are so far-fetched and they are so rare and otherworldly that if you try to pigeonhole them and have standardized statements for them, which the moon in Capricorn would be likely to, you get lost rather quickly, because you look at the pigeonholed sentence and then you think of what's happening in your experience, which is quite a rare thing, and they don't match up to each other. All right. Introduction of spiritual things into the emotions, which are quite unruly, even for her with her emotional discipline, is more than most people can handle, and often there is a seesaw conflict between base and basic emotions and loftier spiritual sentiments, and this vacillating tendency is almost impossible to resolve, especially since she has irrational intuitions that are equally unsettling. She must defer to self-conscious reasoning to do this. Now this talks about the whole pattern. We're trying to understand her now. You know, there's nothing like out-Freudianing a Freudian. All right, we're saying that the emotions are unruly. We know that. And she's got emotional discipline from the moon in Capricorn with positive aspects. And it's more than most people can handle when spiritual things come in, because spiritual things are so otherworldly and we are so adapted to this world. And we're talking about a seesaw conflict, which means we're talking about the opposition. The base and basic emotions are the moon side of it, and the loftier spiritual sentiments are the Neptunian side of it. And it's impossible to resolve because they're each pulling a different direction, especially when the irrational intuitions come in and they're unsettling. Now we're bringing in the Uranus, because Uranus, Neptunian intuitions, when they come in, they always have a reason, even if it's some seemingly kooky reason. But when Uranus comes in, it just comes in with an intuition, and it's supra-rational, and it's true, but you don't necessarily always know why. And then the last part of the sentence is bringing in the self-consciousness. We're saying that the Sun and Jupiter trine Neptune and sextile the Uranus moon, and with that, the self, the Sun, is capable of reasoning to bring it about. Jupiter is higher reasoning, abstract ideation. See, now this is nothing especially profound. It's not exactly cookbook, but you can come to great understandings just by using the simple keywords that we have and putting them together in a good way. Now, when we started this course, I gave everybody a book from the last time I did this course, but I'm out of books now. But what I'll try to do is, if you come back next time, or if you want to come back next time, I'll give you lists of keywords that we're using for everything. In fact, I can, bit by bit, I can even print out what effectually is the book. Okay.
What's the name of the book?
Same as this, Astrological Tools and Techniques.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Oh, it's your
It's a
book.
good reference.
Yeah,
You're the author.
I'm the author. It's not one necessarily that I'm proud of, but you got to put your name on it, I guess, whether it's good or not
It's
good.
very good.
I don't know any author that ever feels good about their work. Lulu wrote a great book and got it published, and she considers it too sophomoric because of the very tedious way she always put the adjective in the same place in the sentence and things like that. Am I reading your mind?
Okay.
Am I reading your mind?
Yes. I have a question.
Yes.
Is the moon always base emotional tendencies in everyone's
It's all
charts?
the basic emotions for everyone, especially the feelings. The moon in the emotional nature represents the receptor of feelings. The moon and Cancer together
Okay.
represent that. Okay. Yeah. The way it works is that the basic emotionality is the moon. But the part of the emotionality where you assert yourself to bring something to you is Mars. So Mars represents the self-assertion of Aries, but the result is when people are trying to take things to themselves, it becomes repulsive, and that's the repulsion of Scorpio. So the assertive and repulsive emotionality are indicated by Mars. But in that flow between subject and object, if you're self-sacrificing and you give to others, you attract to you. And the self-sacrificing is the Libra, and the attraction is the Taurus, and so the self-sacrificing attractive emotionality is indicated by Venus.
Jupiter too, right? Is attracted?
Yes, but the intent, or the extreme, or the intent of the emotions, of the attractive emotions is to give. Whereas the intent of the repulsive emotions is selfishness, and that's Saturn. So, but the basic three for the emotionality are the Moon, Mars, and Venus. The secondary on a much lower level are Jupiter and Saturn. All of the planets have some emotional input, but if you're talking about the basic laws that work in the desire world, you're talking about those planets. Okay. All right. Number 10, maybe this is not going to take us 45 minutes. We may have to race. In her artistic emotionality, she has an unusual, almost preternatural tendency to sacrifice. Love means sacrifice to her. Now we're talking about Venus in Pisces. And Venus in Pisces is sacrificial love. The common statement for Venus in Pisces, if you want an image to carry with you forever, is the old adage, the rose never smells so sweet as when it's crushed. And it's that willingness to be crushed in order to give somebody the sweetest that you have is what it is indicated by Venus in Pisces. She said, I've never had a Venus in Pisces girlfriend. All the ones I run into are tough women.
Venus and Taurus.
Not very sacrificial.
That's so sacrificial. But the sixth house, would that also
Yes.
be a sacrificial,
Yes.
Yeah, like the service.
like
yes.
service workplace for?
Coupled with this is a mild tendency to love obsession. Not so strong in either its sacrificial or obsessive tendencies that she would give herself to bondage and discipline, but there should be another comma before the but strong enough to sacrifice herself to a demanding ideal. Now Lulu tells me that this is true, that she did sacrifice. She didn't get into bondage and discipline though, did she?
I don't know. She may have. I mean, she was very.
Well, how much? I expect the dirt from you. What more? Why would you want to have a Virgo if you couldn't get the dirt from them? Because that's the best part of gossip is the dirt.
I believe there was something like that.
There was something, and so it's hard telling because the aspect is not so strong. We're talking about, in this sentence, we're talking about the Venus square Pluto, which indicates love obsession and means that she's carried sacrifice so far that if she has some powerful figure, which is Pluto, that represents to her the object of her love, she's willing to sacrifice to that end. The ideal that love requires sacrifice to be at its very best, and the idea that ideals can be absolute, but if there is an element of demand or compulsion, they become destructively impossible. The ideals are by nature impossible to manifest material, and compulsion compounds the impossibility, and sometimes there is a tendency to compulsively want them to be impossible. This sounds like a Freudian, doesn't it? So that one can fail because one is familiar and comfortable with failure in a kind of artistic or emotional martyrdom. Is that honest to describing her? I know it's not a very clearly written
Well, I'm not
sentence.
sure. I just have to break it into pieces.
It's a description of my daddy. It's a description of my daddy issues. Good job. Fantastic.
Does Daddy spank you?
It probably would have been easier.
Yes, yes. I had a Scorpio father who was a threatener. Can you understand what the sentence says?
Actually, I was thinking about the previous sentence, so I'm sorry. I had a...
What we're saying is, on one hand, we're saying that ideals are impossible because the closer you come to an ideal, the more it recedes. And ideals in the ninth house are open-ended. The further you go, the further there is to go. You know, the stronger the telescope, the further you can see, and the further you can see that things are away. So ideals are impossible. But obsession is also impossible because you're basically trying to scrunch something and make it disappear, or you're trying to attain something that's impossible to attain, and the harder you try, the more it fights back. You know, like people who try to overpower an addiction like alcoholism or something like that, rather than surrender to the fact that they have a weakness and take help. If they try to overpower it, they just make it worse. And that's what we're trying to get at with the Venus square Pluto. That's what that part of the sentence says. And it then becomes a psychological thing, especially with the moon opposite Neptune, to get confused by it all, and after a while you become comfortable with the fact of failure. And then so you can identify with failure, but you can't identify with success. And to some extent there is some of that in this personality.
Yeah. Would you say that I mean, she had tons of affairs, and some people say she had like 5 appointments a day or something with different men towards the end of her life.
Yes.
And she was married to 2
She's
men.
always trying to prove love.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can't prove it. You can't prove it. Too bad I didn't know her. She might have even gone for me.
She would have gone.
I'm desperate, Lulu. I'm desperate. I'm in love with people who are dead.
But she also gave all the material things too. You know, she gave her body, I mean, it was all like a sacrifice to her, very much.
There is a philosophy of a kind of active negativism in the love emotionality, with a kind of purposeful passivity before demands. And this is no doubt related to the confusion in the basic emotionality, and both are probably the result of spiritual influences coming into the emotionality, which in its selfish ways is not ready to receive and understand spiritual things. Who is ready for it? You know, all right. That's fairly simple. We tied together the last 2 sentences and everything that we've done earlier. Active negativism is, Pluto is in a positive sign, and that's negative in an active kind of way, and it's a philosophical outlook for her. And purposeful passivity is the 9th house squaring to Venus, and Venus we see is very passive. And it's all related to the confusion, which is the Moon-Neptune situation, and it's all due to the fact that in the emotionality, all 3 octave planets Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are in the emotionality, and all of them are troubled in some way. And it's sort of like when you bring in those things that are so different from our current consciousness, they cause a lot of upsets. And so that's what we're looking at is upsets here. All right. The assertive emotionality, now we're talking about Mars, is consistent with the basic and attractive elements of the emotionality, that is the Moon and Venus, in that there is a gentleness and an artistic flair. The gentleness and the artistic flair obviously are due to Libra, and unfortunately a bit of vacillation. That is also due to the Libra. Mars in Libra always vacillates. Yeah, something Lulu and I both have in common. All right. There may be more style than courage or bravery, but there is discipline enough to take strong stands in action and to keep herself healthfully active. All right, more style than courage or bravery is Mars in Libra. Mars in Libra is often a coward. It can show off and do all of those kinds of things, but when it comes down to it, it's often cowardly. But it is trine to Pluto, and that indicates a discipline that is strong enough to take stands on action, especially relative to a philosophical principle, and to keep herself healthfully active. That is, Mars in the first house demands some kind of physical activity to be healthy. And so we can see now we're getting a resolution of the whole emotionality when we bring in the Mars side, because we can see that all of the parts have something positive and something negative. She may try to show off with bravado. She tried to become a flamenco dancer. In fact, was a flamenco dancer for part of her life. But she will follow through and stick with her assertions, Mars trine Pluto, until there is some degree of success. When you find a trine, you always are going to find some degree of success. All right? In general, there's a Y missing. There is a healthy balance of positives and negatives in the emotionality, though there is a slight tilt toward the positives. So it should be a nip and tuck emotional life, certainly a life with many active emotional experiences, and certainly no complacency with regard to motivation. That's a summary sentence. A healthy balance of positives and negatives, meaning to say there are both hard aspects, oppositions and squares, as well as sextiles and trines. There are more sextiles and trines than there are squares and oppositions, and the sextiles and trines are stronger in intensity, with one exception, and that is the opposition to Neptune, which is pretty strong, of the Moon to Neptune. And so the last sentence to cap it off, if she persists in her motivations, she should succeed, provided she does not get caught in decision between antithetical emotions or blocked in love or artistic obsession. Pretty obvious. Another summary statement saying that the oppositions and the ups and downs of Libra, as well as that square to the Venus. All right. How much do you have any astrological experience at all?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
I have read a few books and
Okay.
studied a little bit.
So you can understand what we're doing.
I'm following what you're doing a bit, yes.
Okay.
I have some questions, but.
Sure.
Well, one thing I'm wondering about is that the houses are all different sizes.
Yes.
Is there significance in that? Is it,
Yes.
For example, if a house has less degrees in it?
Yes. It means that any planet passing through that house will be there for a shorter amount of time, which means there will be less direct influence on it. And it will be less likely to make aspects with other planets, because there are less degrees that would be touching off an aspect with another planet, and that means it's less likely to generate activity in a small house rather than a large house. However, if a house becomes too large, it becomes unbalanced, and some of the many opportunities available to it become latent, and that's when there's an interception. Okay, you have another question? Or?
Well, I guess what I'm kind of looking for is, and maybe I'm 2 years too late.
Yeah.
Was it 4 years? You said
This is the third year.
Third year. Okay. Is when you look at a horoscope, like where do you start? Where do you start?
We're trying to go through all of the things here, the whole business of it, but it takes us 3 years because I'm a terribly slow person.
Okay.
And I'll see that you get everything we've done. If you want, I can even give you tapes or DVDs of all of the classes. These are all on DVD, the whole series, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're interested in that, it's a lot of time, but we've been doing it once a week during the school year for this is the third year. So, all right. So, you can see there are 43 previous DVDs.
I suppose you have the best of.
I think we need a master editor to do that.
All right. We're looking at the M1 chart now. Eugene McCarthy. Very different personality. This is not a very emotional individual. The moon is in Aquarius, which tends to be a bit dry and unemotional. There are 4 planets in water signs, but 2, Saturn and Pluto, are restrictive or limiting. And 1 is Mercury, which is certainly much more mental than emotional. So we used astrology in the sentence, which is sometimes a no-no, but this is for the sake of education. I don't even have to explain it. The whole sentence explains itself. The first phrase is why the person is not very emotional, and then the astrological explanation are all of the other phrases in the sentence. And it tells it fairly clearly. All right, now we go into real things now. The basic emotionality is up front and out before the world for all to see, which is not usually conducive to emotional expression. Because if you're out there before the world, there's always a tendency to be shy. The moon doesn't like to be in Aquarius, and the moon doesn't like to be in the first house. It would rather be in something like the 4th house, where it can be behind the scenes mothering things into existence rather than having to be out there where everyone can see. All right. Many of the emotions are assertive, combative, or impulsive. And though the purpose of desire is to motivate, this is not the fashion in which desire would prefer to motivate. What we're talking about here is that the moon is conjoined to Uranus, which is impulsive. And it's also opposite to Mars, which is combative. And so we can see that this is somebody who's push, push, push. That it does motivate himself and it motivates other people, but it's not always the best way to get done, especially if you're in something like the United States Senate. If you are, a little bit rash like the moon opposite Mars tends to be, you tend to make enemies. And so usually it's the people with tact that get everywhere. All right. This tendency in the emotionality has been present since very early childhood. And part of the tendency might be due to some kind of progressive or experimental form of child rearing or a political philosophy of such a nature. The early child, where that sentence is completely dedicated to the moon in the 1st house. From very early childhood means it's within 3 degrees of the ascendant. And the fact that it is progressive, Aquarius is progressive, Uranus is progressive, or experimental, or something like that. And so it indicates, like I have actually run into children that have been raised by 2 parents who were both Freudian psychiatrists, and that was a childhood that had Uranus in the 1st house. And so it's that kind of a thing that happens. So there's something experimental. Aquarius tries to be experimental, and perhaps he was raised by some kind of liberal philosophy. I have not read a lot of biography on him, so I can't say a lot. All right, sentence number 5. Assuming this is true, it is more likely due to the influence of the mother or the more overt objective parent who also influenced his assertive and expansive individuality. All right, this is again very, very astrological, the sentence. The influence of the mother is the moon. And being in the first house, the moon is very overt. The objective parent, which in our society usually is the mother, but it isn't always, the objective parent is the 10th house. And Jupiter rules the 10th house, and Jupiter is in a sextile and trine with the moon and the Mars, which is where the last phrase comes in, indicated that this Jupiterian parent, who was very positive, also influenced him toward being aggressive and assertive in life, though probably in a very positive way because the Jupiter is in a sextile and a trine. All right, sentence number 6. Though some might find him emotionally combative and a bit vexatious, those challenging, forward-looking emotions are harmonious to his character and consonant with his individuality, all of which are more positive than negative. Now we're saying that the challenging quality comes from the Uranus and the Mars producing this push-push, assertive-aggressive tendency, but all of those planets also aspect the Sun, which is the individuality. And the Sun is conjoined to Jupiter, so there's a great deal of positivity here. So even though there is something irascible about him, it's basically with very benign or very positive intentions. Probably just gets impatient. 7, the masculine assertive emotions, which are part of the bluster and boisterousness, are strongly inclined toward the positive, especially in pride. This sentence is exclusively directed to the Mars trine Jupiter, which is very, very strong. It's only 4 minutes from being exact. And it is waxing, so it's still coming on, it's culminating. So you can say that there is an extremely positive pride. This is not someone who ever wants to put himself in a bad place. And this is somebody that doesn't need a course in love yourself. This is somebody that respects himself and has tons and tons of pride. All right. He is motivated to act for the good and to objectify the good because he has very good feelings about himself. All of the goods in there point to Jupiter. The objectification is the 2nd house. He is making objective. His end, and this is a case where the Sun in the 2nd house does not mean money making. It means responsibility, but more than anything, it represents objectification of the good. All right, very simple sentence. I like this man very much. I have a recording of him doing humor. I happen to be a lover of Mort Sahl, if you know who Mort Sahl is. Mort Sahl was a very bright grad student at California at Berkeley. And then he started doing things in the Hungry Eye nightclub in San Francisco. And he is one of the most witty comedians you'd ever want to find. And he didn't have the success because he was too bright that you would expect somebody to have that had all of that insight. I actually went through 2 hours of that moving parking lot that they call the San Diego Freeway to see the Mort Sahl show in Hollywood and saw him in person, and it was worth all of those 2 hours of what? S-A-H-L. Mort Saal. If you can get anything by it, I'm sure there might be something even on YouTube. Yeah. If you like, I've got a CD if you want to borrow it sometime. Huh?
I love comedy.
Yes. Yeah. All right. He has a lot of daring in his drives for public service, and in expressing himself in that fashion, self-respect is a natural emotion for him to experience. Bottled up emotions tend to stagnate and fester, while actively expressed emotions usually lead to emotional health. That last phrase is educational. Thank you, Carl Jung. We're just more talking about the Mars. And we're trying to understand the emotionality, and this is somebody that's emotionally healthy because he gets his emotions out. Some of them may be pushed out a little immaturely, and some of them may push a little too hard, and that makes him unpleasant, but he has this good self-image and self-respect because he does get things out. From this we can conclude that while some might consider him to be irascible, cranky, contentious, what some might consider to be irascible, cranky, or contentious emotions are more likely to be indignation, disaffection, or dissatisfaction with inadequately idealistic principles. So this describes where he's coming from. You know, if it may sound hot and blistery. Well, you don't like the quality of the sentences?
No.
If you don't like the quality of sentences, make better ones yourself. Some of the sentences, if I had punctuated right and got decent spelling and everything in there, they would have been pretty decent sentences. Even the Anais Nins. I was expecting you to come in and eclipse everything I did on Anais Nin. But next week we'll be on Frida Kahlo.
Frida Kahlo next week?
Yeah, Frida Kahlo, and for the writers, this gets to be this is as much my family activity as it is a class. I hope you don't mind that. All right. The outward masculine assertive qualities are prevalent in the emotionality. That's just a simple statement. That's why we spend so much time, is because they are the majority of the emotionality. This prevalence is primarily directed to his work and professional life. Second house and the 6th house, and Jupiter rules the 10th house. So it has to do with every leg of his professional life, which has a lot to do with changing the external world, which brings us right back to the ascendant. All of those aspects involving the planets right on the ascendant, and Jupiter actually even sextiles the ascendant, means he's trying to change the external world. These same factors of the emotionality are conducive to leadership. Though not a touchy-feely person, his sentiments and emotions are strong enough and of such a nature that they induce pride in others, as well as an inclination to follow his assertions. If the trumpets sound an uncertain note, who shall come to battle? And we're still talking about the same things in the emotionality. We're still talking about the Mars and Jupiter and Sun and Moon and Aquarius, and these are just different ways of looking at it, because they are, we could have said everything in 3 sentences, but we wouldn't have. That's the thing with astrology. You have to try as much variety as possible, because for some people they won't fit what you have experienced before. They're using the same materials, but they'll do it in a slightly different way. And if you get used to using a lot of variety and seeing how the same pattern can work in different ways, you're much more likely to be successful if you're trying to help someone, because you're more likely to hit on what is important to them so you can start getting at it. His attractive emotionality, Venus, while not as strong and not similar to the general character, is good, and it has few hitches to it. We're saying that Venus is not you know, it's not like the rest of the character, which is so positive sign oriented and so Mars Sun oriented. But it has few hitches, meaning to say it has basically all positive aspects. It has a mild square to Uranus, but it has the less than a degree sextile to Mercury. All right. The attractive emotionality is a classic in that he loves things and that love draws things to him. We're talking exclusively about Venus in Taurus in this sentence. It's a classic because Venus is in her rulership and she's most like herself. And Taurus is a sign of a substance or objects or things. And because she loves them, she attracts them to her. That's the way things go. These drawing propensities are likely to manifest as composition. That is, drawing things together in order to communicate them in either writing or speaking. Now we're seeing a different interpretation. It isn't just wealth-oriented as most people would look at Venus in Taurus. We're saying that Venus in Taurus is in the 3rd house. And it draws things together to communicate them. And that's what we call composition. We compose a composition in order to communicate it to someone else. And the 3rd house is where she intends to do that. And the 3rd house is usually either writing or speaking, though it can be another communicative form sometimes. It's not necessarily an expressive form. This part of the emotionality is harmonious with the mentality in a similar way to the way the other parts of the emotionality are harmonious with the individuality and personality, except that there is even more concord here. All right? We're saying that this part of the emotionality is harmonious with the mentality. We're talking here about the sextile of Venus, the part of the emotionality, to Mercury, which is the mentality. And that's similar to the way that the other parts, the Mars and the Moon, are harmonious with the individuality, the Sun and the personality, the ascendant. Except that there's even more concord here, because there's one strong positive aspect and a great concord between the mind and the loving emotions, or the concordant emotions that is stronger. All right. His attractive emotions work through an extraordinary ability to persuade people by blending charged thoughts with rich, full-bodied emotions, which can be communicated with ostensive clarity and almost tangible examples. That's a decent sentence. Yes. All right. The attractive emotions, Venus, extraordinary ability is an exact sextile, persuade people. Persuasion is what you get when you mix the mind together with the loving emotions. By blending emotionally charged thoughts, that is, bringing that the thoughts have a lot of emotion to them, which full-bodied emotions. The full-bodied is Venus in Taurus, is very rich, and it has a lot of texture to it, and it is something that is almost tangible. The 3rd house is ostensive. It's the kind of knowledge, it's like point and see, like you get in elementary education, and the tangibility comes from the Taurus. You look like you have a question on your mind.
No.
You don't?
No.
You're not proposing to me? You're not proposing to me?
Well, not other than private. Richard.
The whole world knows I'm in love with her, but unfortunately it's absolutely impossible. I have something with impossible loving things. All right. Number 19. Like all of us, his is a character in the making, and in his case, Some of his difficulties in emotionality derive from trying to blend the assertive emotionality with the attractive emotionality. We're saying here, we're talking now about the Uranus square to Venus. And in that first house, it's assertive. And he brings that into the emotion, into the attractive emotionality with Venus, and that causes problems. So we're saying he isn't a perfect person, not even in his positive emotions. It seems that his enthusiasm and assertion through which he expresses his pride and principled nature, as well as his sometimes harshness in impatience, has influenced his attractive emotionality in such a way that he romanticizes principles and sometimes gets carried away in flights of fantasy. All right, that's trying to integrate the whole business into the opposition of Moon and Uranus to Mars. We're trying to integrate that into the square of Venus. We can see what he's trying to do, and it gets into him in such a way that he becomes fanciful. Venus square Uranus gets carried away in flights of fantasy, or he romanticizes principles. Venus Uranus is probably one of the most romantic of all aspects, which is, since in a lot of males it indicates gayness, though I don't think he had any gayness in him, which is why the Uranus-Venus kind of gay is hyper-romantic. You find a lot of that in there. All right. Number 21, he seems to be a becoming altruist, but is not quite there yet. That's another statement of the square. The Uranus and the Aquarius are very altruistic, but the Venus shows that there is still the individual love and the personal love, which may be possessive because of the Taurus part of it, is inhibitive of being a perfect altruist. Overall, his emotionality is a mixed. There are more negative tendencies than positives, but the positives are stronger and more accessible. Attaining eternal principles and ideals requires emotional patience. All right, we're saying that there are more negative aspects to all of the emotional planets, emotionality planets, than there are positive when you start counting them out. But the strongest ones are the trine of Jupiter to Mars and the sextile of Venus to Mercury. And stronger aspects usually are far more effective, and you're much more likely to use them. Some of the fainter things don't come through so easily. And so you grab onto what's obviously there. All right, you got any more questions? All right, I'll try to print some more stuff out for you next time. And you can decide whether you want to get a 44. I have them in either cassette tapes or in DVDs for television. Yeah. Okay. Now next time I expect sentences, even from Jerry.
Where is the other gentleman that used to come? What was his name? He used to always sit here.
Mark? I think he has something else doing tonight. He'll probably be here tomorrow night for sure. Tomorrow night is a step up class, and it's been running for about 7 or 8 years. But it's one you can also jump into. In that, we're now looking at the spirituality. Each meeting we look at one person, and we'll be spending the entire, probably be about 80 minutes tomorrow night talking about the individuality of Vincent van Gogh. And we've spent, we spend overall probably on each of the horoscopes, there are 16 horoscopes, we spend about 17 hours on each one. And so you come away with a pretty good understanding. So if you're interested in that, it's a little bit more technical and it goes a little bit deeper, and it talks about life. Some of these sentences talked about life, but I'm the kind of person that's turned off by astrology for, as a realm all by itself. It has to relate to life and it has to relate to psychology and people, or it's worthless.
Well, I'm actually kind of in the realm right now of how to relate to astrology, so
Yeah, okay,
maybe I think I'll stick with this.
okay, okay.
The I was a beginner in the introductory,
Yeah.
totally,
I have an
was, like,
introductory-
very,
I have an introductory series too.
sensitive after,
There is an introductory series too that is 27 lectures long. And did you watch television?
That's how I saw you.
Yeah, that's the introductory are shortened. The things that are on television are shortened from the introductory course. I can get you a set of that if you're interested in a set of that.
I would be interested in.
Okay, all right.
Because what I'm looking for is how to approach it, other than, I mean, it's not just a question of, well, there's the houses and each
Yeah.
house stands for this and
Yeah.
the planet stands for this, so if you have
Yes.
a wheel, you could,
Yes.
arrange them all.
Yeah, it sounds like a really good way to look at it.
Okay.
Yeah, because it has to be integrated into life. And this is a method that if followed, that over the whole 3 years, you do get into a chart pretty well. You can see now, like, if you're dealing with a person, from working with these sentences and the ones that we're going to do the next week, you can see how to relate to emotionality. You've got a pattern for doing that. And from some of the earlier things with fill in the blanks, keywords and things like that, you start even in a more simple way. Good. Any questions? You're not inviting me out?
please come out with me.
Yeah, you notice that she's airy. She didn't ask a question. She made it as an assertion. Please come out with me. That wasn't a question. It wasn't like, would you go out with me? It was please.
You will go out with me now.
If you please go out with me. You have a question?
Just this is very basic. Is Venus in Taurus generally
Sumptuous.
Yeah,
Sumptuous.
and is there materialism to it too?
Often.
Yeah.
But one of the best keywords I can think for Venus and Taurus is sumptuous. Yes. Richly elegant. Like dark, burnished, polished wood and things like that. Okay. Thank you very much. Now, you all got the assignment for next week, and